Today we're privileged to have with us Jessie Rasmussen. Jessie is president of Buffett Early Childhood Fund and the CEHS Distinguished Alumnus for 2011. I'm going to refer to you as Senator Rasmussen from time to time, but Jessie will probably work
Jessie
as
is
well.
just fine.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on your
Thank
selection as the Distinguished Alumnus. It's an honor and it's a privilege for us to have you here with us today. As I looked through your resume, and I've followed your career somewhat as a public school educator and as a professor and person who's interested in early childhood education, it appears to me that your career has been so well aligned. If we could give lectures about alignment, it seems like you started out having a dream about early childhood education. And as Susan Scott says, change occurs gradually, then suddenly. Well, suddenly, you're president of Buffett Early Childhood Fund. Tell us a little bit about your education, your experiences, and the things that have kind of brought you to this moment in time.
I think I'd have to be honest and said it's not been a well-planned map, but it's always had the same thing driving me, no matter where the journey took me. And I was one of 7 kids, grew up here in Lincoln, was expected that we went to college, but there was also pretty much the expectation it would be the university, because with 7 kids, that's what the parents could afford. And I look back now and I would say that if I was to choose a university, knowing what I know now from my own experiences, I would have chosen the University of Nebraska. I got a great education here, and in many respects what I got was very forward thinking and prepared me for lots of different opportunities that came along in my life. And that's the other key word, is opportunities. And the willingness to embrace those opportunities when they were presented to me. So I came to the university, didn't really know for sure what I wanted to do. My mom, who was also going to school at the same time in studying food and nutrition, getting her master's degree, urged me to look at the child development program in the School of Home Economics. That's where it was in those days. And so I did, and I found out that that is really what I love, is I love watching children discover and learn. And I could sit and watch children forever. And I thought, well, wow, this would be a great career, because I just have so much fun playing with the children and helping them grow and develop. So I fell in love with the field. I was told, you better get a degree in something else, though, because there aren't any jobs in early childhood. Now, that was in the mid-'60s, and there weren't when I started college, but Head Start came along my sophomore year, and I worked in the first Head Start program in Lincoln over the summer, and that introduced me to a whole new world. I grew up in pretty much a Leave It to Beaver home environment, and my Head Start experience introduced me to a different part of Lincoln. And I saw for the first time children who weren't well-fed, well-dressed, didn't have stable homes. I saw the face of poverty for the first time and realized it wasn't that far away from me. And realized that every child deserved the same kind of opportunities in the earliest years, but not every child was getting those opportunities. So that experience really had quite an impact on my life in terms of creating a very strong interest in ensuring that all children, regardless of their circumstances, had good beginnings. So I had that opportunity. I had another opportunity because of the university's partnership with a school in Detroit to go spend a semester there. And again, it was a school that was located in inner city Detroit. It was operated much like a graduate program. The students all lived together but all worked in the community as well as attended classes. And that made me aware of lots of different cultures in our country And then I had an opportunity right before I graduated in a summer program to learn more about people with disabilities. That had not been an interest of mine. That's not where I started in my freshman year in college. But I realized that being prepared to understand child development, human development, really does set you up well to work with people with disabilities in a way that focuses on what they are able to do as opposed to what they're not able to do. So every opportunity outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom here at the university really set me up to take advantage of what opportunities came along in my career.
Good. And you've had plenty of opportunities. I love that word, opportunity.
I have. My first job out of college was as a Head Start teacher in North Omaha, working with kids of low income who had disabilities. So it was sort of a combination of opportunities I'd had in my undergraduate education. And it was also a program that was run by the former director of the lab school here. And so talk about an opportunity. She knew some of us as students and encouraged us to apply for this job. So I worked there for about 5 years, and then when my husband was transferred to Indianapolis, I started as a volunteer in a private school for people with disabilities, but then was hired on as a teacher in the early childhood program. And learned a lot from that. Came back to Nebraska and had a former mentor of mine in early childhood call me and say, I have the perfect job for you. And it was as the director of a new program established by the Jewish Community Center in Omaha. So here's another culture that I was introduced to, another faith outside my own life experience. And by then I had realized I could take on totally new experiences as long as I was willing to learn, to study, to listen, and to become a part of the community in which I was working. And so I had that job for about 5 years, and then went back and got my master's degree. I had 2 young children. At that time my mom became ill, wanted to spend more time with her. So got my master's program, came back here, and then I thought I wanted to work with the babies because I saw the science about, even waiting till 3 is too late. That we need to pay attention to what happens in the very first months and years of a child's life. So I landed a job at Monroe-Meyer on the University of Nebraska Medical Center campus. And I was working with families who had kids under the age of 3 who had disabilities, learned to work in the homes, work with families. During that time, I'd been caught up in some advocacy efforts. I remember a group of us became very alarmed when about 4 or 5 children died in a home child care program as a result of a fire. And the child care provider had fallen asleep, cigarette, started a fire. She got out, but the children did not. And that's when we began to realize that we had no licensing standards for who was taking care of our children. So many of us got involved in that effort. And as part of that, and some other things that happened in my life, a friend of mine convinced me that I ought to run for the legislature. And once again, maybe I was just naive. I just thought I could do it. So I ran. I didn't really know what I was doing, and was successful and ended up having a great 4 years experience in the Nebraska unicameral. Learned a lot about other fields, other issues for this state, land, water, environmental, and higher education, as well as what my field was. But I think that's when I really began to realize that we have to pay attention to the policies. We can't work anywhere in isolation. We have to realize that there are policies made at all levels, at the local level, whether it's your homeowners association or it's a city policy, state or federal. They impact our work environments and our families and our communities. And so I really liked that experience, but then I had an opportunity to do what I call cross the street and get into public administration. And I found I liked that even more. It's one thing to come up with the policies, but it's really great fun to implement them and see them become real. And the funny thing was I was able to actually implement some of the legislation I'd been involved in.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it was. So I was able to see how they were all connected. that the policy and the practice, and what I learned along the way too is the research, the science, the constant learning process. Those things all have to go together to make things work for you. So I did that for a couple years under then Governor Nelson. When he left, new governor, new administration, so then I went to work for Governor Vilsack in Iowa, worked there for 4 years as the Director of Health and Human Services. And then I came back and had an opportunity to do some policy work around early childhood, and that's when the Buffett Early Childhood Fund saw what I was doing and thought I was a good fit for their agenda. I would have never thought that I would have been a politician. I would have never thought I would have been working for a philanthropy, but they all fit at the right moment in my life. And this job now really allows me to take practice and policy in public administration and pull it all together in terms of what we do with our private dollars to try and leverage good things happening for young kids.
Couldn't think of a better person for the job.
Well,
that is terrific.
I love it, and part of it is this philanthropy is very hands-on. We don't just give out grants and monitor them, and we really say, here's what we want to get done, who's going to partner with us to get this done, and how do we sit at the table together to work and make this happen. And that's the only way I think I could work in a philanthropy, and why I'm really lucky that this came along for me at this point in my life.
There are a lot of friends of early childhood education, and I think that number of people in the U.S. and in Nebraska is growing. There are other people who I'm not sure understand the benefits of birth to 5, and especially working with the most vulnerable of families and children. When you talk to people about the benefits of an early childhood program, what are the things that you tell them?
One of the things I learned from my policy work is know your audience and know where they're coming from and fit it into their framework. I was driven initially around social justice. I'm still driven by that every child in this country should have equal opportunity to be successful. And that's what drove me. But that argument doesn't work with everybody. And so what I learned was if this person's worried about crime, then I give them the statistics about those children who get strong beginnings in the first 5 years and how they compare to kids who don't get that they're less likely to be involved in crime, less likely to be involved in illegal drugs, much more likely to stay in school, graduate from school, and become productive citizens. If it's somebody who's worried about the workforce, I talk about, aging of America. We have fewer and fewer young people for the jobs. We can't afford to waste 40,000 children in Nebraska in terms of the future workforce for Nebraska. And then I show them again that those kids who get strong beginnings are more likely to become productive citizens. If they're entrepreneurs and they're running a business, I say, you want people with money in their pocket so they can buy your product. This is how you get to people who can earn money. And so when you take it from their framework, we have learned that it's not about being a Republican or Democrat. It's really about seeing how the early years are connected to the issues of greatest concern to them. Now that doesn't work. We still have those that are naysayers. Interesting enough, today it's more about they don't believe it lasts. That tends to be the argument. And what we tried to do originally is to measure whether or not those IQ scores for Head Start kids, they really went up and then they faded off again by 3rd grade. And now what the scientists are saying, that's really not what's important. What's important is that those kids that got good education in the early years are still in school, they're graduating from school, they're becoming productive members of our community. Isn't that what really counts? And that's where programs like Head Start have made a tremendous difference for this country. The problem is, Head Start's only available for a small percentage of the kids that should be eligible for that program.
Well, policy development advocacy,
Yes.
which I hear you saying, and the alignment with your values and goals have really worked well. And I think we need to just get you on the road and start talking with people. Overall, as you look at education in America, what are the things that inspire you about it today, and what are the concerns that you have about, and let's focus on public education.
And I'm a big supporter of public education. I believe it's one of the hallmarks of democracy and hallmarks of this country, and that we must see that it continues to exist and exist in a way that is effective for all of our children. I get inspired by the fact that there are so many people that are dedicated to getting this right. There are some fabulous educators at all levels who work in very challenging situations, and in today's climate are often being beat up by the public for not fixing all the things that surround a child, their family circumstances, their poverty, their untreated mental health issues. Schools are expected to, teachers are expected to fix children in spite of all those things, and that's unfair. There's some. I get inspired by fabulous teachers. I also get inspired by what I think is a growing commitment from people with resources, philanthropists, who also believe in our education system and want to help be part of the solution to make sure it's a strong education system for all of our children. And so I think the experimentation with different organizational structures is good, as long as it's not about taking the cream of the crop and continuing to give them better and better opportunities, as long as it remains grounded in that public education for all children and all children having the opportunity to great educational experiences. I think it's okay to try different structures. So I'm encouraged by that. I think the challenging thing is, somebody said to me once, you know, my father's been dead for 50 years. If he came back and it was 100 years from when he went to school, the only thing he would recognize in our society is our school system, because it hasn't changed that much. And I think there's some truth in that sometimes with institutions like public education, we get stuck in doing things the way we've always done them. And it's hard to break away from that. And we don't exactly promote taking risks.
No, we don't.
And I learned that in the public life and public administration. It's a risk-aversive environment, and we reinforce that, and that's unfortunate. And so I think the more we can promote and support those things that are working effectively, the better off we're going to be, and we have to be willing to change. And of course, I would think this, but I think birth to 5 is part of one of the true reforms of public education, is understanding that children don't just start learning at age 5, not even age 3, that children are born learning, and we have to make sure their environment doesn't get in the way of that learning.
Well, I've heard you talk about a lot of your work with great enthusiasm.
Yes.
If you could pinpoint a couple of things that have brought you the most joy from the work that you've done and the life that you've lived, what would those things be?
I think there are two things. One is, when I was a practitioner, I can remember the little girl they told me would never walk. And I remember the first day she walked. And so, and I also remember, painfully so, the happy little boy who came into our program, who then ended up in a foster care system that turned those bright lights in his eyes off. And so I remember those experiences as really powerful messages to me that we have a tremendous responsibility as the adults in young children's lives for what happens for them. And so those are the kinds of things that I remember. Today, the joy as well as the inspiration for me is my own grandchildren. And I have 3 grandchildren, about to have a 4th one. The 7-year-old and 5-year-old just live a few blocks away.
That's
so
nice.
I get to see them and enjoy them. Our third one is 2-year-old is in Philadelphia, and I've learned to fall in love with Philadelphia because I go there quite a bit. And here's what happens for me. It's renewed my joy in watching young children grow and develop. But it also reminds me every time I'm with my grandchildren that life is still not like that for all children. My work now, we provide a very high quality birth to 5 early childhood program for children at risk all across the country, in Nebraska as well as in many other states. And when I go to those schools and see those children, I still see stark contrasts between what they're experiencing in their early years and what my grandchildren are experiencing. And we know from the research, these differences don't suddenly show up at 5 or even 3. They start as early as 12 months. And the more sensitive our assessment tools become, we're learning it's probably as early as 9 months. And once those children start falling behind as toddlers, they tend to stay behind if we don't do the right kind of intervention. So that keeps me going, even though I probably could be retiring at this age. It keeps me going because I know the job isn't over yet. The job isn't done.
Good. You've had a very distinguished professional career. You're also a mom, you're a spouse, you've been actively engaged in all kinds of things in the community. Anything that if you were to start over again you would do differently? And then the second part of that question is, you're a very busy person, and you've been a very busy person. What do you do for fun? What do you do for entertainment?
There is very little I would have changed. I think what my parents gave me in terms of fundamental values, that everybody has worth and value, and respect that, that if there are things that need to be done in your community, it's your job to do them as part of that community. Their attitude towards learning as a lifelong experience. They both embraced learning until they died, and that's been given to me. Those are wonderful gifts, and they have enabled me to embrace the opportunities in front of me and to learn from them. So there's very little I would change. I think I had one little lull where I was doing consulting work, and I kind of wished I would have taken advantage of that time to get my PhD. But I think maybe I've got my PhD in life.
I think you do too. I think you do too.
So the truth of the matter is I'm a bit of a workaholic because I am in a wonderful place that I really love getting up every morning and going to my work. My greatest joy right now, as I shared with you, is my grandchildren. I can't get enough of them. I could tell you a lot of stories. I bore people to tears, I'm sure, because I think everything they do is brilliant and funny and mind-boggling. So I can't get enough of that. I think that's really wonderful. But I do like, I like to read. I like to have time with my husband. We both work out. Took a great long walk this morning at 6 o'clock. That was the way we started a day. I like doing those kinds of things, and probably should find more time to be with friends. So it's people.
Good. A lot of young people are searching for something to do, and I think legitimately want to do something that makes a difference. Right before this interview, you talked to a small group of those people. What kind of advice do you have for young folks who are looking to make a difference in the world and probably are drawn to issues of social justice and equality and equity and things of those type, which I think are wonderful. But what do you say to them?
I think one thing I would say to them is don't get too worried about which job career you should pick. Get a good education that gives you a broad understanding of a lot of things. Yes, pick a focus, but realize there's going to be lots of different ways to approach that work. I wanted to work with children and families. I've always worked with children and families, but I've worn a lot of different hats. And so being willing to recognize that there's lots of different ways to approach the work that you are attracted to doing. And I think the other thing is then be open to opportunities. Don't get locked into thinking there is one perfect job for you, and if you can't find it, somehow you've failed. Or to think that your first job will necessarily be your last job. It might be, but it may not be. And that it's okay, just get started. And then to never stop learning from that job, but also from the science and what other people in your field are teaching you. And to realize that most of these things are connected. I talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. You really can't separate policy from practice. That doesn't mean you have to go into being a policymaker, but you need to understand the relationship of policy to your work environment and to your community. And so I think that understanding that sort of three-legged stool is out there, the policy, the practice, and the knowledge or research and science is important for young people to recognize. And you know, most of them are going to have 4 or 5 different jobs.
Yes.
Look for opportunities. Don't look for the perfect job. Look for opportunities, and that's how you'll find the pathway to the perfect job.
Be open.
Yes.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, that's really, you know, a young lady asked me after the session, she said, were there any surprises for you, or did you end up being what you thought you would be? And I said, yes and yes. I ended up being what I thought I would be, but there were some surprises along the way. And be open to those. Enjoy the surprises. That's an okay thing.
One question that I didn't have on your sheet, but I'm kind of curious about. Yes. You've mentioned, both in the last session and in this interview, the values base that you received growing up in your family, that mom and dad were a strong influence. Do you see that influence today from the home, from some homes, all homes, few homes, many homes? What's your observation about that whole values piece, without getting into things that may go way beyond our scope here? But are kids being raised by families who are so busy they sometimes don't have time to pay attention to that, or what are your observations?
Probably the most predominant observation is that almost every parent I've met wants to be a good parent, even those that are really doing a bad job of it. They don't wake up in the morning and say, my goal today is to be a lousy parent. They want to be a good parent, and they want to have a good family. But those babies don't come with instructions. And a lot of people seem to think, well, parenting is just instinctual, you know, but it isn't. Mm-hmm. It comes from your own life experiences, and for many people, their life experiences were not so good. And so people with resources tend to be able to reach out to grandma, to a parent education class, a book. They know how to problem solve. They have what we call today social capital. They can get the answers, but not all families can get the answers. I think, you know, one of the things I've experienced, we do family surveys, parent surveys with the families that we work with in our EduCare schools. And what's exciting to see is the change in their expectations for their children. And many of them didn't think their children would graduate from high school, let alone go to college or end up in a career. And when we begin to sort of pull back the curtain and they can see how their children could, then they want that. And it changes the way they interact with their children. They're even more motivated. What is going to help my son realize that he can be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, he can be what he wants to be? What do I need to do to make that happen? Great. So that's kind of a long way of answering. I think values are still very important to families, and I don't think it's the time factor. I think it's more about information and networking that supports parenting and supports family values. I think sometimes that word today has actually been misused.
Yeah, it has.
It's a great word, and some people have turned it into a way to be discriminatory, prejudiced, if not hateful, and judgmental. And I don't think that's what you were talking about. And I think that most parents and families want to have strong values. They want good things for their children. And I think we have to respond to that want and that need and give them the opportunity to do that.
That was a great response from you for me to end my question asking and ask, is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude the interview?
Do you know, and I'm not just saying this because of this honor that's been given to me. This is a great university, and I get more proud of it every year and every time I learn more about it. And I'm eager to share that with people around the country, as I still run into people, whether it's on the golf course in Arizona or in a seminar in Boston, that they think Nebraska is the middle of nowhere. And I heard a mom, a Latina mom, say just the other day, she said, my husband and I were from New York, and we decided to move here. And somebody said, why? And she said, well, right after 9/11, we started thinking about what we wanted for our family, and we realized we really wanted a home. And she said, there was no place that we could buy a home that we could afford in New York. So my aunt in Nebraska encouraged me to come to Nebraska. So I came to Nebraska, and she said, I found this amazing school for my child. I never thought anybody thought my child was worth this school that they have now, this EduCare school. And then the directors encouraged me to come to work, and I said, well, I don't have a degree. And they said, no problem, we'll help you get a degree. She now has her associate degree. She's working on her bachelor's degree. And she said, I found heaven in the middle of nowhere. So
what a wonderful statement.
I feel that way about Nebraska, and I think the University of Nebraska is a star attraction for other people, but it's also what really makes this state strong.
Well, you've inspired us, and you continue to inspire us.
Well, thank you.
And we're pleased that you're our distinguished alumni and that other people get the benefit of your background and your future work with EduCare and the Buffett Early Childhood Fund.
Thank you so much. I
for
appreciate
being
it.
here.
You bet.